Well, let's look at congruent triangles in your MT5 LT2 seminar. Uh, before we start, do the first 4 questions. We'll go over them in class or do them as prior knowledge. What we want to look at today is I want you to use the congruence criterion. That seems like a big word, but it's just what makes corresponding congruent parts of congruent triangles to solve problems. We're going to use the third angle theorem and the properties of triangle congruence to solve problems and prove relationships in geometric figures. We did some of this in the last chapter. The principle of superposition says if I can take a shape and I can do transformations where I can move one shape onto the other, well, those shapes are congruent. That's all it says. Now, if you have 2 congruent polygons, we know all the corresponding parts are congruent. Not all the parts. You can't just say every part. But if they're in the same part of the diagram, they're congruent. We call that can't talk. We call that corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. That's a long statement, so we abbreviate CPCTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So let's do that on this shape. I want you to show me that these 2 shapes are congruent. Let's start with the angles. I know angle A is congruent to angle W because they both have one arc. Angle B is congruent to angle X. Angle C is congruent to angle Y. And angle D is congruent to angle Z. And I can do the same thing with my sides. I'll start with my first side of BC that has 1 tick mark. Well, that's congruent to XY. Then I'll look at my side with 2. I know AB is congruent to WX. I know CD is congruent to, with 3 sides, that would be WZ. And finally, well, that was 4, wasn't it? I got to back that up. No. Boom, 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 boom. There we go. CD has 4 segments, so that's congruent to YZ. Let's do the one with 3 then. That would be AD. And that's congruent to XZ. Now we want to write a congruent statement. So when you write a congruent statement, you're just going to write down the shapes, the names of the shapes that are congruent in the same order. So if I go A, B, C, D, that's congruent to W, X, Y, Z. Because I can see all my congruence between them. Angle A is congruent to angle W. Angle B is congruent to angle X. Side AB is congruent to side WX. Side AD is congruent to side WZ, and so on. There we go. We'll do the next part in the next video.